أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا كل شيء خلقناه بقدر وما أمرنا إلا واحدة كلمح بالبصر ولقد أهلكنا أشياءكم فهل من مدكر وكل شيء فعلوه في الزبر وكل صغير وكبير مستطر إن المتقين في جنات ونهار في مقعد صدق عند مليك مقتدر في مقعد صدق عند مليك مقتدر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولله الحمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. خلق الإنسان من علق. اقرأ 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 وربك الأكرم. وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم. علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى أن رآه استغنى إن إلى ربك الرجعى صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for tuning in first and foremost. My name is Ali Basit, and my co-host name is...
My name is Huda.
And she is Huda. And you're watching Body and Mind, the experiences of health professionals and researchers during and outside the pandemic. This panel is the fourth in a series of panel discussions hosted by the Thaqalain Muslim Association at the University of Toronto St. George, the University of Toronto Scarborough, and Queen's University.
Before we get started, we wanted to acknowledge that while this event is virtual, we recognize that our universities are situated on lands of Indigenous nations, specifically the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. These territories are included in the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between Indigenous peoples of this land to care for the land and water and take from it only what one needs while leaving enough for others. From a Muslim perspective, this doesn't sound too different from the role assigned to us by God to be guardians of the earth and to not be wasteful. And we hope everyone can join us in being mindful of the land and water that we all share, inshallah.
Thank you, Huda, for the wonderful land acknowledgement. For today's panel, we'd like to welcome three accomplished health professionals and researchers to discuss their experiences and journeys in their profession, what they love about their careers, and what some of their struggles are. Welcome Hana Abbas, Yasmeen Al-Attar, and Elzahraa Majed. Welcome, guys. Hana Abbas completed her Bachelor's of Science at the University of Toronto, majoring both in neuroscience and cognitive psychology. She completed a Master's of Arts in Experimental Psychology at the University of Manitoba and is currently a graduate student in clinical psychology at the University of Western Ontario. Hana has ambitions to specialize in neuropsychology, which is a branch of clinical psychology aimed at understanding the complex relationships between the brain and behavior. Fittingly, Hana's current research focuses on the use of naturalistic functional magnetic resonance imaging, otherwise known as the short-term fMRI paradigms, in combination with neuropsychology, testing to identify neural abnormalities in people with epilepsy. Now, that's a lot to take in, especially with neuropsychology. She will know what you're thinking before you even think it, but that may not be correct. We'll wait and stay tuned to find out. Dr. Yasmeen Al-Attar is a practicing dentist in Waterloo, Ontario. This is also where she grew up and completed her undergraduate degree in health studies. She completed an applied master's degree in occupational health at the University of McGill, followed by a dental degree at the University of Toronto. Dr. Al-Attar is passionate about her profession and views it as a means to transform people's health and lives, restore their dignity, inspire them to take charge of their oral health, and further their journey to becoming the best version of themselves. In other words, an epitome of envisioning above and beyond. Elzahraa Majed is a second-year PhD candidate at Queen's University, studying health promotion. She has a master's degree in public health and epidemiology. I think you can say it better than me. Epidemiology and biostatistics, and a master's of science in health and kinesiology. Her research centers around newcomers and their experiences of immigration, agriculture, and their community belonging. She's interested in studying the roles of physical activity in fostering newcomers' inclusion or exclusion in Canadian communities, and how it's related to their reported physical and mental outcomes. During her MPH, she had an internship with UNRWA, which I do not know the long term for, in Lebanon, where where she worked with Syrian and Palestinian refugees on different health issues. She's also collaborated on different research projects with different institutions around the world, including the USA, Qatar, and Lebanon. All that experience by a single person, I had trouble just mentioning it. I'm not exactly sure how she went. She accomplished all those things. While there you have it, it's a wonderful topic and an even more wonderful group of panelists that we have, a well-rounded trio. Without further ado, let's get into it. So we would like to start off exploring some of your journeys. We want to know a bit about yourselves and your fields, so please feel free to elaborate. But let's start with you, Elzahraa. Can you describe what health promotion is and tell us a bit more about what you're researching at the moment, and if you can share with us your journey into health promotion?
These are long questions. I need to remember them. First, thank you all for having me, and salam alaikum for everyone. So my name is Elzahraa or Zahra, and I'm from Lebanon. I've been in Canada for about 2.5 years, and I'm currently studying. I'm actually a third-year PhD student. I started in the winter, so this is my third year in health promotion. Health promotion is, well, it's actually tough to define it, but personally, I see it as a branch of public health. It's a way of promoting health. I mean, I know it's in the words, but we basically work with communities. We work with certain populations to promote health and healthy behaviors among them. What were the other questions? I'm sorry.
So yeah, a little bit about what health promotion is, what you're currently researching, and how you got into health promotion to begin with.
Yeah, so I'm currently, before I get to that, how I got into health promotion, I feel like it's because of my whole journey. I did my bachelor in a scientific field. It was in medical laboratory sciences, which was totally different than what I'm doing right now. The focus of it was mainly lab-based. I didn't really interact with human beings, which was really annoying to me because like I'm a type of person who would like to be in the society, working with other people, trying to help other people if I can. So for that, I did a Master's of Public Health after I finished my undergraduate degree. And it was really different. It satisfied everything I wanted. And the focus of it was mostly in epidemiology, which is the science of disease, and biostatistics, which is numbers, you know. But then after that, I had the opportunity to travel to the US, and I did a master's there again in health and kinesiology, but mainly the focus was health promotion. So that's how I started into this field. My research back then was totally different than now, because like I've always wanted to work with underserved populations or community of color, you know, like people that resonate with me, but I didn't have that chance. And then when I came here to Canada, I actually had the chance to pick my own research interest, which I'm so grateful for. And because of that, I was able to pick my research interest, which is working with immigrants and newcomers mostly. So that's it.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing that. Epidemiology, the science of disease. Where have you been all this time? We can use you for COVID.
Yeah, honestly, it's a very needed field right now, although like I haven't really practiced it a lot. I do understand, of course, like the field and everything in it, but it's mostly like it's mostly focused on that aspect, whereas
Right.
health promotion, it's focused on the community and working with other people, you know, focusing on mostly, I would say, like community-based issues, health behaviors, helping others, improving their mental health outcomes, physical health outcomes. Yeah, it's a really large field, so you really need to pick something. It's like in our lab, for instance, right now, some of us work with indigenous populations, other people work with like other countries, you know. I work with immigrants and newcomers. So it's a really diverse field, and each one of us or each one of the researchers can pick the field they're interested in.
Okay, so inshallah, COVID 2.0 will be prevented.
Hopefully.
Hana, you're currently doing a master's in clinical psychology with the hopes of specializing in neuropsychology. Can you describe what clinical psychology and neuropsychology are and why you entered into this field? And maybe as an add-on, can you really read our thoughts?
Well, first of all, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting me to join this panel. To touch on your questions, in general, clinical psychology emphasizes the integration of theory, research, and clinical training to assess and treat psychologically based distress or dysfunction in a wide range of adult and child populations using an evidence-based approach. So clinical psychology students and trainees take courses in areas including ethics, psychopathology, diagnosis, research design, and more. As well, trainees get experience in a number of practicum settings, which focus on assessment and intervention. And we also undergo a year-long pre-doctoral internship prior to graduation. Neuropsychology is a branch of this, and it focuses specifically on how the brain and the nervous system correlate with the mind to influence an individual's cognitive and behavioral abilities. So neuropsychologists are often involved in research and clinical settings, assessing and treating individuals with neuropsychological problems. And these might include autism, concussion, brain cancer, stroke, dementia, epilepsy, and the list goes on. But they may also work in forensic settings. And in terms of my journey, I always wanted to work closely with people in a hospital setting. I think some of the other sisters mentioned just having that kind of flexibility and variability in the day. And I had always been interested in biology. So I had initially specialized in neuroscience for my undergrad, but quickly became interested in more of the interplay between the brain and the mind. So I was involved early on in my undergraduate career in research relating to things like visual perception and facial recognition. But my thought process always kind of went towards, what would happen if someone couldn't perceive or couldn't recognize faces for whatever reason. So thus, these experiences and others really drew me towards neuropsychology because of this sort of strong desire that I had to understand, in particular, sort of sensory and motor deficits resulting from injury to the brain. And yeah, no, I can't read anyone's mind, but that's a very common thought. But it all comes down to, observation and understanding signs and symptoms and things that people exhibit to behaviorally.
Okay. What if we're under the fMRI? Can you read our thoughts then?
That becomes a lot harder, actually.
Oh, Hana, your research on methods used to identify neural abnormalities in people with epilepsy is clearly important work. Can you tell us what the job of a clinical psychologist looks like on a day-to-day basis and what goes into research in clinical and neuropsychology?
For sure. So this is a really tricky question just because, as I alluded to earlier, there are so many different populations that one could work with within the context of clinical psychology. And also there are so many settings within which this work might occur. So a sort of general answer is that clinical psychologists meet with clients to identify their problems, be they emotional, mental, or behavioral, or all of the above. And they do this by conducting interviews and performing assessments to examine an individual's broad strengths and deficits. So after evaluating the results of these assessments in combination with information obtained from interview and in consideration of an individual's cultural identity, language abilities, age, gender, and a host of other things, the psychologist might come to a diagnosis, although this is not always necessary, nor is it the goal in all cases. And regardless, using the information obtained, a psychologist might then develop and implement treatment plans and conduct therapy and continually follow up to evaluate therapeutic outcomes and modify the plan and the course of treatment if need be. And again, this is really the broadest overview of the process, but there is quite a lot of variability. So some clinical psychologists might focus very exclusively on therapy. Some are very interested in research. Some take on more managerial roles and are involved in program development and community-based initiatives. Neuropsychologists follow sort of a similar framework of assessment, diagnosis, and treatment, but in the context of neurological disorders, as I mentioned earlier, and they can actually become quite specialized, for example, in working closely with surgical teams to evaluate an individual with epilepsy's pre-surgical cognitive profile and predicting their post-surgical cognitive outcomes, for example. To answer the latter half of your question, research in clinical psychology and neuropsychology may be focused on specific aspects of the process I already kind of outlined. So for example, you might ask things like, how can we predict those who will be at risk for depression? How can we better identify the seizure focus in epilepsy? How well does this treatment work? So research is a large part of our training, especially at the master's and PhD levels, but the investment later on in the career really depends on the individual clinical psychologist's interests and their abilities to conduct research in the setting that they work in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and on a patient side, I took part in cognitive, I don't know, as a guinea pig on a test. I think on the patient side, it sounds a lot more fun than the researcher side.
It can be. It's a kind of like you get thrown a lot of different tasks that you get to do, but it's also pretty exhausting if you're trying to do workup for like dementia or something. It's often a whole day of assessment and you need like lunch and snack breaks. And especially for people who are more vulnerable and have these cognitive difficulties where it's harder to concentrate for long periods of the day, or people older in age, it can be pretty exhausting for sure.
A lot to take in, but inshallah, very good work. Elzahraa, as mentioned, you're doing a PhD in health promotion and research with refugees and newcomers to Canada. Previously, you've worked with Syrian and Palestinian refugees in Lebanon to advocate their health and well-being. So you've worked with, and you're currently working with vulnerable populations. Can you tell us about what goes into research with vulnerable populations, especially in the community setting?
Yeah, for sure. But to answer your question, I'll have to split my answer between pre-COVID and post-COVID because like it's a totally different situation right now. Usually how things go is the branch of health promotion I'm working with, it's called community-based participatory research, which what means is that in simpler terms, a person would go to the community, spend time with them, get to know them, and essentially be part of them because like otherwise you'll be just going to the community, trying to collect data and go out. And in that sense, if you do the latter, you wouldn't really get anything useful to your research and to the community at the same time. So given that, with the branch that I work with and the community I work with, essentially in my specific like role right now, I would identify a community. In my case, I work in, like, I'm currently in Kingston, Ontario. So I do work with a certain community here. And it consists of mainly newcomers. These newcomers could either have come here in a refugee status or an immigrant status. So it depends. And a newcomer is usually a person who has been in Canada for less than 10 years. So it could be someone who just immigrated or someone who came here as a refugee. And in terms of my actual work is that honestly, like I remember the first time I just volunteered to go there, sit with them, get to know them, have a cup of coffee or tea, you know, just like sitting and socializing with other people. And then tell them like, sort of why I'm there. I mean, I'm not gonna tell them I'm there because I wanna collect data because like this is gonna throw them off, especially if you're talking in the context of refugees. You need to keep in mind that these people have come from a very vulnerable place, and it's like, and if we look from where they came from, they have been heavily researched. Like they have been exposed to many studies, many data collection, and all of that. You know, some people take advantage of them. So yes, you need to keep that in mind when you're actually talking with them. You need to be sort of their friend, but at the same time establishing some limits because you're also a researcher. And even though I might identify, with them, in terms of like my identity as a Muslim or a woman who wears a hijab, at the same time, I'm still a researcher. So I do have sort of an insider-outsider status with like some sort of power dynamics. So I need to keep all of those in my mind, but at the same time have some fun and enjoy the process, and just keep in mind that hopefully doing something for their benefit, and at the same time improving myself and improving my own research and my career aspirations.
Right. So I guess chill and research at the same time with the okay, very nice, alhamdulillah. Sounds fun. So I will go back to Sister Huda, and she is going to cover some of the challenges for us.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a perfect segue when you mentioned pre and post COVID, because we are going to get into some of the challenges, in general and in COVID, inshallah. And almost every sector in our society has been impacted by the pandemic in one way or another, but the medical and health field specifically has been, in the middle of it all. If you do any type of research involving people, as Zahra and Hana do, you've likely had to change the way you do your research or put it on a pause or maybe even completely end it. But I want to get your perspectives on how the pandemic has impacted your work, but also some of the common challenges that professionals and researchers in your field experience. The challenges that generally come with a job, and not necessarily just pandemic related. So maybe we could continue with Zahra. What are some of the challenges of being a health promotion researcher in general, but also those that you've had to experience in the pandemic related to your research?
For sure, yeah, Huda. So basically, the challenges sort of come from being, like I mentioned before, being a graduate student, having to gain trust when you're going to a certain community, wanting to talk with them. Sometimes it's really hard to actually get this entry point when you want to go into this community. So it helps if you have some connections. It helps if you actually volunteer your time to go there. But that's only in the scope of my own research. Some health promotion researchers, they do different type of work, which totally differs. But essentially the main idea is that mostly it's going to be like community-based work. So that's one of the main challenges, I would say. In terms of challenges that pertain to like being a graduate student in health promotion, is the question like what comes next after you graduate, right? I'm not gonna jump like later on, but there are so many options for later on, like for career aspirations and all of that. But I'm not sure if you're gonna ask about this later on, so I'm not sure if I should jump on this topic or not. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. What do you think?
Yeah, you can talk about it now if you'd like.
Sure. So as graduate students, as PhD students specifically, you do research. That's the main thing. Like that's why you're doing a PhD. And one of the main ideas is that you're either going to go into academia and find a faculty position, which basically what means is that you're going to be teaching or doing some research in an academic institution. So that's the main aspiration for all of us. And at some point you feel like maybe that's not for you because of the bureaucratic aspects of it and how competitive it might be. So the other direction would be work in the industry, which means that you would either work in government organization or like a non-governmental organization. There are so many categories over there, but these also come with their own challenges, because like you're overqualified. So it depends on what kind of career you want, right? I mean, that's a very complicated procedure, but that's also a challenge for someone who's doing research, especially at the moment. And when I say at the moment, it's like COVID times, because like right now with COVID, there is nothing sort of expected, like what's going to happen. And in my own research, I had to hold off working with the community for 1 whole year, which sort of delayed my own research, because when COVID started, everything shut down. And the community I used to go and see and sit with, they weren't meeting anymore. And communications went off, even emails, even everything. And you sort of have to understand that these people work with an organization, and these organizations were overwhelmed with the whole work from home situation. So what's happening right now is that we're shifting our in-person meetings to Zoom meetings or on the phone meetings. And hopefully if things get better with time, maybe like with the change of the weather, hopefully then maybe we can have something outdoors or like with smaller numbers while keeping ourselves safe, right? But we'll see. You have to sort of see on a day-to-day basis and adjust to that, because I mean, I need to graduate at some point. And you can't stay in your program for 6-7 years, but we have to roll with it. I feel like that's the way to say it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that uncertainty, and not just short term, but even the long term. And having to adapt to the moment, because you never know what's going to happen next. Hana, of course, has the pandemic had any influence on how you do your research? And can you also speak to some of the challenges a clinical psychologist or researcher experiences on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the pandemic, definitely, like the others have mentioned, we saw sort of drastic shifts when the pandemic hit in March. And this mainly involved a lot of switches to everything to be online, even research and therapy. So we've seen now, you have to conduct your thesis research online or use data that's already been collected. Currently, I'm working on an online study of postoperative epilepsy patients, and this involves translating these measures, like neuropsychological measures that are usually done in person, to an online setting. And we don't know what the impacts of that will be. Will the results be reliable. And this is still something that's very new and challenging, just trying to get these tests right online, trying to go through proper ethics to be able to connect with and interact with vulnerable groups over the internet, and of course involves some enhancement of technological skills and coding abilities and all those fun things. But it's kind of exciting at the same time, in that it allows us to be able to connect with patients without needing to bring them into the lab, so from wherever they may be living. And if these methods prove to be useful and feasible and produce good results, it may actually open up some avenues in terms of researching unique or rare groups of people from all over the place. But as I mentioned, a lot of therapists have also had to move their practices online, which is challenging again for those same reasons, including ethical reasons and sort of security of technology. And there's also been some slowdown because of that in terms of the practicum opportunities that are available to us. So a lot of therapists have been kind of closing down their clinics and working remotely and don't sort of want to train people at this time during this crazy time. And as well, just we had that shift of sort of classes and schooling to online, which is not ideal for interacting and gaining as much of an experience as possible from your peers and your teachers. In general, though, in terms of clinical psychology, in my experience, one of the biggest challenges has been just the issue of staying motivated and patient throughout the entire process. It's a very long journey. You need, 2 years master's, 4-year PhD, and a year of internship. And that's the best case scenario, if you can get all your research done in a timely fashion. So it can feel kind of never ending. So just being motivated that there's an end in sight can be quite hard at times. And this involves, taking time to yourself and for family, because in reality, the workload that comes with this path could likely fill up all of your time if you really let it. Sort of a similar challenge comes with research, and that's the ability to be patient and trust the process and really be comfortable with uncertainty. And this last point, I think, is the hardest for me personally, and I think a lot of people to deal with, just that research takes time. It doesn't always work out. You'll find sometimes you're waiting on results or people or equipment for months at a time, and it's really unpredictable, especially exacerbated now during the pandemic. And you have to sort of adopt this attitude that, something didn't work today, or I don't know how to do this, but it's fine and I have time. I'll get through it, because otherwise every day is just too stressful and it doesn't feel, just so rewarding. But yeah, being comfortable with uncertainty is not something that we're easily able to do. It's not in our nature, and it's often linked to, a lot of anxiety and depression. So it's honestly quite hard to rectify this at times. And the last thing I'll mention is just the idea of imposter syndrome. So it's easy to feel like you're struggling and you're struggling alone, and it's because you don't belong here or you're not smart or good enough. This is something that many people, researchers, academics face, and it's important to acknowledge this and be aware of it so we can, push back and stop comparing ourselves to others or letting these real or perceived standards, take over our lives and our mental well-being.
Yeah, thank you for reminding us all of the importance of patience in this time. I think that's so key to really being able to get through it, is to remember what our purpose is, and at the end of the day, what are we looking forward to? And I love that you did talk about the challenges, but you also talked about the good things that can come out of this. And I'm sure Zahra and I can attest to everything you said about being a graduate student. So we're there with you, inshallah.
Good to know. See, the imposter syndrome is already wearing off. Reading.
It goes away.
But I guess this is another perfect segue. You guys are just leading us in the perfect direction. So Hana, I guess continuing with you and moving into the joys, what do you find most enjoyable about being a clinical psychology researcher?
Yeah, so the major one for me is just being able to meet with and form connections with like-minded people who share this same passion for psychology and who are motivated to solve the big problems in the field and in the world with like this high level of integrity. So I feel really well supported and connected within my program and within my field. Relatedly, some of my best days are when I get to like interact with and speak with real people, real patients. It really solidifies the learning experience and brings me back to the humbling reality, which is that, you know, the work that I'm doing is ultimately for people. Another thing is just that, as I mentioned, it's easy to get bogged down and demotivated by the hardships and the minutiae details that come with research. But again, it becomes worth it when you look up and you see the larger goal in front of you. You know, when you see that the work I'm doing might actually help just one person, or might contribute to some literature, or might inspire the community in some way. And finally, I guess I'll just note that, at least in terms of my graduate school experience so far, I found that there's a lot of flexibility and variability in terms of the day-to-day, as I sort of mentioned. There's a lot of opportunity for travel. There's a lot of opportunity to partake in different events and workshops and learning experiences as well. So I don't find it monotonous at all, and it really keeps you challenged and interested at all times. And it also allows a lot of flexibility for people hoping to have families and have more of a life on the side as well.
Yeah, that's also important, is that family aspect. I think that really keeps a lot of people going. But Zahra, you and I, you know, we always talk about the ups and downs of research. And I always say to people, like, most of the time the ups make up for the lows, at least for myself. And I think most people think I'm crazy, but I think based on what Hana said, you know, maybe I have a sympathetic, you know, colleague there too. But I want to get your perspective on this. You did talk about some of the challenges. What are some of the highlights of doing research in health promotion?
You mean like the advantages or the positive?
What you love about it, what you look forward to?
Sometimes it can be really tough, especially when you're trying to write and publish something, and it takes a long time. Sometimes it takes like a year or even more. But then afterwards, when you get something published in your name, or, you know, you see like there are some highlights about you. I know this might be a bit selfish, but I mean, you feel proud of yourself and the hard work you've been doing. That's purely in terms of academic terms, in terms of feeling that you achieved something within an institution. But within your actual work, when you feel like you're doing something that's actually useful to other people, either in terms of publishing something for research that might help other researchers to do some intervention or to change something, or in terms of doing actual something for the community you're working with, right? If you're tackling some social justice issues or some issues on racism or inclusion, or the things like we like to talk about, maybe Huda and I, and you feel like your work is sort of impacting someone's life, either in the slightest aspect, honestly, just like being there and letting them feel like they're being heard in the first place. I feel like that's one of the highlights I can relate to in my own position as a researcher. And I sort of also resonate with what Dr. Yasmeen has said in terms of being out there and represent yourself as a Muslim woman. Coming from a country from the Middle East, I mean, you do feel like you want to represent yourself, of course, but going into North America, it's a totally different story, especially when you're in an institution. I mean, I'm at Queen's University, and there isn't like a very large amount of hijabi girls there. I mean, there are, but not like when you go to bigger cities like Ottawa or Toronto, right? So when you're in that institution and you feel like you can make an impact by being there, by representing your religion and yourself and your community, and sometimes take certain roles in changing some aspects in the university by being there, that's one of the highlights that I really appreciate and I really relate to. You're on mute, Huda.
It had to happen once. Yeah, I think it's like a theme that's kind of been coming throughout the panels is, you know, when we go into the workplace as women who wear hijab, it's, you know, you're doing your job, but there's, just like Dr. Yasmeen said, there's, the way that you do it is also so important because you are that representative simply by wearing your hijab. But I guess moving, again, you guys are just so good. Let's, we've been talking in general with panelists about how Islam motivates them or how they incorporate it into their professions or their approach to their professions. And, for many in the health field, a lot of time they'll tell you that one of the strongest motivators is the desire to help people. And that's a very Islamic approach, choosing a life path where your goal is to help people live their best lives. So Dr. Yasmeen, how does Islam motivate you, or how does it inform your work as a dentist? So Zahra, how does Islam motivate you as a health promotion researcher and specialist?
Honestly, I feel like Dr. Yasmeen has touched on all of the aspects that relate to that. No, it's fine. I'm thankful you did that, to be honest. I can't really add, except that maybe apply what she said to our fields. So in terms of health promotion, again, in terms of the community, being ethical with them, showing your manners as a Muslim woman or a Muslim human being, even in terms of working with other colleagues and in an academic institution, or with government organizations or non-government organizations, just being truthful as much as possible, being blunt about your beliefs, your values, while respecting others, and just be yourself, show your values, and hopefully you'll find something in return. Because otherwise, if you show a different image of what a Muslim person is, you're just being, you're not being special, you're not being an actual Muslim, you're not showing what Islam is, especially with the stereotypes on media and what you see sometimes in movies or, in films, and how they misportray us as Muslim individuals. So yeah, just being there, doing your job, try to be as truthful as possible, and hopefully this will resonate with other people.
Yeah, and I really like that you said, be yourself, be true to yourself, because, especially when you do that and you add that element of bravery in there, you could be paving the way for other women or other Muslims to be able to, have a much easier time, whether in education or in the profession. And of course, Hana, would you say that Islam motivates you and your work in any way?
Definitely, for a number of reasons, and I might go in a little bit of a different direction than the previous sisters, but I reiterate all of their points as well. Just related to kind of what I was talking about earlier, and that there's a lot of uncertainty at times in the research process and in sort of the path of pursuing graduate school, just the long length of it and the intensiveness of it. I think there's a need often to remind yourself of sort of the overarching goals, so to stay motivated. So personally, I always try to first think, that I'm attempting to gain knowledge in the name of God, in the hopes of getting closer to Him through His creations. Another thing is to, the goal might be to become a source of inspiration for my own children in the future and for other Muslim women who have similar goals. And lastly, just the goal of, as we all mentioned already, just ultimately giving back through the provision of knowledge and services to people in general, but also the community, which holds my roots specifically. So considering the mental health and neuropsychological needs of the Islamic community in Canada, where I am currently. So thinking about these things sort of motivates me to continue on and try my best, and also not to lose hope in this process. And another thing I'll mention is that I try to have a constant awareness that the things I'm learning and the system within which I'll likely be working have been formed on the basis of Western or secular values and ideologies. So I always try to form connections and see the contrast between these things and the theories and the research that I'm learning about, and more Islamic ideals about the self and the mind for my own interest, but also so to not be constrained by just one way of thinking. And as mentioned, it's one of my personal goals to give back to the Islamic community. And I think this will require this type of thinking in terms of how Western psychological practices might be relevant and apply to Muslims in Canada.
Yeah, I love that. I love especially when you talked about looking at different theories related to, for example, the self and the mind. Islam has a really interesting perspective, and there's also the Western perspective, and some of it actually aligns, but some of it differs. And being able to explore those differences and similarities is really interesting. But I think I'll pass it on to Brother Ali Basit for audience questions now.
Yeah, thank you, Sister Huda. I think most of this talk was more spiritual than the physical, which is very refreshing to hear. Going back to what Dr. Yasmeen was saying about the demands, you can demand for prayer room and whatnot, or I demand this and that, but make sure you say please at the end so that you get but for the audience's questions, yes, let's take some of those. And the first one comes to Elzahraa. I think I was saying your name wrong the whole time, so my apologies. Are there differences in the ways refugees see certain health practices or treatments that they get compared to patients who were born or raised in Canada? And how does this play into some of the psychological or emotional challenges of working with refugees or displaced people?
For sure, yeah. There's a huge difference. There's a cultural difference. There's, not even for refugees, even for any immigrant, to be honest, someone who comes from a different perspective, who comes into the Canadian context, if they haven't been exposed to this context in terms of healthcare, in terms of research, in terms of interacting with others in this first place, they're going to find it challenging to actually adapt and be part of the community. That's why I try to do the work I'm doing, and other people are also doing the work I'm doing, to help them feel they belong more to the community they're in, not to the Canadian community. I won't go there because that's a very controversial topic. We're not trying to force them to be part of a bigger society, but hopefully understanding other people and understanding the differences between other communities, that's crucial. Because you need to live here, you need to adapt. Otherwise you won't be able to enjoy living here, right? And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
So, how does this play into some of the psychological or emotional challenges of working with refugees or displaced people?
Yeah, so again, just from what I said before, in terms of where these people came from and how some of them, they have been heavily researched in some aspects, especially when it comes to healthcare and providing social services to them. These people would come here, and many of them have faced trauma. So in terms of interacting with them, you should be aware of that. You should be aware of perhaps not asking them questions about their previous experiences, because you don't have the, you're not a clinical psychologist. You don't have the necessary experience to deal with that. But maybe focus on the current aspect, the present, how you can improve their current situation. Because they're struggling, they're trying to adapt to a new context. So there are definitely some psychological challenges. There are definitely some other physiological challenges, because they are physiology and psychology, they're very connected to each other. So yeah, just being mindful of that. Make sure you have the resources to refer them to, because you might not be able to do that yourself. And yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, for me, that was, so Hana, considering the specialized tools and technologies that are involved in your research, I know you have to be aware of the psychological aspect, but also I know you mentioned coding, for example. I'm not sure if you do that yourself, or if you have to learn that yourself and do it, or if someone else does it and you use the tools. How did you develop the various skills needed in order to handle these? And are these taught in the undergraduate classes or courses or practicums?
Yeah, I think that it really depends, I guess. So the undergrad, I didn't find that I had to take a lot of these things that would be giving me the skills I need for the master's, besides learning how to write and learning the basics of psychology and neuroscience. But I think it really hits you when you just get into the master's program and you realize this is what I need to do. This is my thesis or my project, and this is what's involved. And it's really a lot of learning as you go. It's very independent. No one tells you, you're going to have to learn coding or learn how to start an fMRI scan or something like that. You just start, and it feels a little bit like you're digging in the dark. At times, you don't know what you don't know at times. So it's hard to even ask questions or find resources like, who can help me with this, because I don't even know where to start. But yeah, so this is my first time doing anything with fMRI and with coding in general. And it's been a lot of trying to ask colleagues, lab members who are more experienced than myself, watching videos online, enrolling in other courses on the side, reading, and just really trying things out and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And I think that's the scariest part. Sometimes when you don't actually know what to do, you feel paralyzed to actually begin a task. But I think the key, and what everyone seems to tell me, is just start and pick up your pieces later on, fix the mistakes after, just get some hands-on experience. So yeah, it's a little bit of a whirlwind, but you kind of pick it up as you go.
So about the coding part, because I'm interested, did you have to learn it yourself and make the programs yourself?
When I first started, the program I'm using right now was for my thesis is on MATLAB, and I kind of took some pieces from previous lab members who did similar analyses, but I've ended up kind of learning from that skeleton of a code and ended up making my own basically. And then I've taken courses now in like Python and R, and that's just on my own, trying to learn different methods that might be better for creating graphics or doing certain analyses that I need to do. So yeah, sort of a little bit of both, like scaffolding from others and also just trying to learn what might be useful for me.
So okay, always helps to go above and beyond, Sister Huda.
Yeah, and ask questions of your colleagues, like I've also had to learn Python, and that was not something I was expecting to have to do, and I had to reach out to a colleague. And alhamdulillah, if you have a colleague that is helpful, put the ego aside, because growth is more important than that, and asking people who know, inshallah, will be rewarding. So I think there's one question for all of the participants, for all the panelists, and it's a short one. But pretty heavy one. How does faith play a role in scientific research or practice in a secular scientific society? Is there anyone who wants to take that one first?
I could start, I guess. This might be a little bit incoherent. As I mentioned before, I think what has happened with me is just, when I'm reading anything, I think that there's value in taking material from any source if you're able to kind of put things in perspective and take everything with a grain of salt. So realize the history behind the field that you're coming from. There's obviously a very kind of windy history of psychology. Like maybe there was some stuff that's a little bit dicey in the past, but I guess basically to know where the things you're reading about are coming from, but also to take value from these things regardless. So, hopefully sources and material are useful in some way in inspiring you, I guess, to do things. But as well, just, like placing it in the context of, does this fit in with my belief system? And if not, just, keeping that in the back of your mind, so to not, place yourself within, I 100% believe that this theory is right, and this is my life, now. And just also being aware of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything, and we're just touching the surface, and we're just trying to get closer to him by learning, be they from any sources, but hopefully we're getting closer to him through that. I hope that made any sense.
Inshallah, that's the goal always. Zahra or Dr. Yasmeen, did any of you want to answer the question?
Just briefly to add on what Hana said, in terms of, I guess, learning from other like institutions or other theories or school of thoughts, it's not a bad thing. Sometimes it's actually exactly what you know from Islam. So for instance, in our field, one of the most important aspects is ethics. And if you look at the ethical principles, they're just like what we learn in terms of our values from being Muslims. So just being open to learning about others and understanding that, and at the same time, try and relate it to your beliefs. And if it's not related, then that's fine. You're just getting to learn. And there's nothing wrong in that.
Dr. Yasmeen?
Having such wonderful panelists, well experienced and insightful, but also simply just fun to talk to and learn from, makes this the hardest part of the event, where we have to wrap it up a little. So to end off the panel, we'd love to hear from each of you some final advice that you would give to those taking or interested in taking a similar career path to yours. So what final advice would you give to anyone, for Sister Zahra, what final advice would you give to anyone interested in being a health promotion specialist or researcher?
For sure, yeah. Just the main point is ask yourself why you're doing that. Like, why do you want to choose this field in the first place? And reach out to other people who have gone through this path, just to be in the picture, to know what to expect in terms of courses, in terms of career later on, career options, and be mindful of the reason in the first place, and see if it actually aligns with your background and with what you want from later on. I know it's tough, and I know that as an undergraduate or high school students, it's really, I've been there, like you really can be confused at some point, but eventually you'll figure it out. But don't hesitate to ask, don't hesitate to reach out. That's my main advice.
Okay, thank you so much for that advice. Hana, what final advice would you give to anyone interested in pursuing clinical psychology or neuropsychology, as was the specialist, professionally or as a researcher?
Yeah, so the number one thing I always tell people is to plan ahead. So this is extremely competitive field. You need a lot of good experiences and connections to prepare you for the application process and to give you an idea about the kinds of things that interest you in terms of research and practice. So start early, start volunteering, gain some lab experience, but also follow what interests you, as many have mentioned as well today, and trust the process. And so what I mean by this is to take on opportunities that are interesting to you and that you think will be relevant for your future, not just for the application process, and know that many of your experiences can and will be valuable as long as you learn from them and they assist you from getting from point A to B. So you want your experiences to be meaningful and relevant and give you skills, not just to be placeholders on your resume. And the last thing I'll say is that a key thing that I found was it's not that grades don't matter, but again, you want to build up this profile of experiences and skills for yourself and ultimately be able to form a connection with a potential supervisor early on before applying to a clinical psychology program, because your supervisor will ultimately be the person who vouches for you during the process.
Inshallah. I'll pass it back to Sister Huda for some concluding remarks.
Yes, thank you. This brings us to the end of the panel, but thank you so much for being with us today and, spending this Sunday morning with us and sharing your experiences and knowledge and advice. It wasn't just a very career technical type of conversation, but you really highlighted, an approach that one can take, in the medical profession, but I think even outside of it. So thank you for that holistic conversation. And thank you for the incredible work that you do to keep our minds and our bodies and even our mouths healthy. And of course, to our audience, thank you for tuning in. And we hope you found this session beneficial, inshallah.
Inshallah. And we do not end there. We still have a program for you. So, in conclusion, please join us next month on March 6th and 7th at 10:20 a.m., just like today and yesterday, for our next panel featuring poets, writers, artists, and calligraphers, as we talk to them about their journeys, their struggles, and what brings them joy from their passions and careers. As always, don't forget to check out our Instagram page at Career Panel, where we post all the information you need to know about upcoming panels, as well as amazing coffee and tea tutorials, which I think everyone can make use of. Recipes by Sarah's Kitchen, made especially for this event. Thank you again for tuning in, and see you in March, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalam.
Wa alaikum.